Hey, yo, what's up? This is Koski, a fun day back at it once again, kicking in for you and for yours. And we back on this right here in this series about Carter G. Woodson, the Honorable Carter G. Woodson, the reason why we have a Black History Month. And we come out with one of his rare books that's not talked about, A Century of Negro Migration. You know, and I'm very grateful and very humble that we have such books to look at because, after seeing how they do our history with the Harriet Tubman movie that just came recently out and how the white slave master had an affection for her and enslaved her from a black bounty hunter and crazy shit like that. It's glad for us to have historical values of our people that tell us the truth of what really happened back then. You understand what I'm going to say? So we're going to crack into this book, A Century of Negro Migration, by the Honorable Carter G. Woodson. Because that just, was really bad. Now, we on chapter 3, fighting it out on free soil. As you see right here, where I got the book from, it's a very damn good book, very good reading. It talks about a lot about Black history in this land called the United States of America. Chapter 3, fighting it out on free soil. How then was this increasing influx of refugees from the South to be received in the free states? In the older northern states, where there could be no danger of an acclimatization of a large district, the coming of the Negroes did not cause general excitement, though at times the feeling in certain localities was sufficient to make one think so. Fearing that the migration of the Negroes into the North might so increase their numbers as to make them constitute a rather important part of the community. However, some free states enacted laws to restrict the privileges of blacks. Free Negroes have voted in all the colonies except for Georgia and South Carolina, if they had the property qualifications. But after the sentiment attendant upon the struggle of the rights of man had passed away, there was a reaction. There set in a reaction. Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and Kentucky disenfranchised all Negroes not long after the Revolution. They voted in North Carolina until 1835, when the state, feeling that this privilege of one class of Negroes might affect the enslavement of others, prohibited it. The northern states followed in their wake, set up the same barriers against the blacks. They were disenfranchised in New Jersey in 1807, in Connecticut in 1814, and in Pennsylvania in 1838. In 1811, New York passed an act requiring a reduction of certificates of freedom from blacks or mulattoes offering to vote. The second Constitution was adopted in 1823, provided that no man of color, unless he had been for 3 years a citizen of that state, and for 1 year preceding any election, could be seized and possessed of a freehold estate, should be allowed to vote, although this qualification was not required of whites. An act of 1824 relating to the government of Stockbridge Indians provided that no Negro or mulatto shall vote in their council. I want to repeat this once again, but there's Aboriginal cats out there. They're talking about Aboriginal this and that. The Act of 1824 relating to the government of Stockbridge Indians provided that no Negro or mulatto should vote in their council. That increasing prejudice was to a great extent the result of migration into the north of Negroes in a rough where nowhere better illustrated than in Pennsylvania. Prior to the 1800s, especially after 1780, when the state provided a gradual emancipation, there was little racial prejudice in Pennsylvania. When the reactionary legislation of the South made life intolerable for Negroes, debasing them to the plane of beasts, many of free people of color from Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware moved or escaped into Pennsylvania like a steady stream during the next 60 years. As these Negroes tended to concentrate in towns and cities, they caused the supply of labor to exceed, demandingly lowering the wages of some and driving out the employment a number of others who became paupers and consequently criminals. There set into an intense struggle between black and white laborers, immensely accelerating the growth of race prejudice, especially when the abolitionists and the Quakers were giving Negroes industrial training. The first exhibition of this prejudice was seen among the lower class of white people, largely Irish and Germans who, devoted to menial labor, competed directly with the Negroes. It did not require a long time, however, for this feeling to react on a higher class of whites where Negroes settled in large groups. A strong protest arose from the menace of Negro paupers. An attempt was made in 1804 to compel free Negroes to maintain those that might become a public charge. In 1813, the mayor, aldermen, and citizens of Philadelphia asked that free Negroes be taxed to support their poor. Two Philadelphia representatives in the Pennsylvania legislature had a committee appointed in 1815 to consider the advisability of preventing immigration of Negroes. One of the causes then at work was there was that the black population had recently increased to 4,000 in Philadelphia, and more than 4,000 others had come into the city since the previous registration. They were arriving much faster than they could be assimilated. The state of Pennsylvania had about exterminating slavery about 1840, having only 40 slaves that year and only a few hundred at any time after 1810. Many of these, of course, had not had the time to make their way in life as free men. To show how much rapid migration to the city aggravated the situation under these circumstances, one needs to but note the statistics of the increase of the free people of color in that state. There were only 22,492 such persons in Pennsylvania in 1810, but in 1820, there were 30,202, and in 1830, as many as 37,930. This number increased to 47,854 by 1840 and 53,626 by 1850, and to 56,949 by 1860. The undesirable aspect of the situation was that most of the migrating blacks came in crude form. Upon arriving, therefore, said a contemporary, they abandoned themselves to all manner of debauchery and dissipation on great annoyance of many citizens. Thereafter followed a large number of clashes developing into a series of riots of a grave nature. Innocent Negroes attacked for purpose of sport and later for sinister designs were often badly beaten in the streets or even cut with knives. The offenders were not punished, and if the Negroes defended themselves, they were usually severely penalized. In 1819, 3 white women stoned to death a woman of color to death. A few youths entered a Negro church in Philadelphia in 1825 and throwing pepper, giving a rise to suffocating fumes, which caused panic, which resulted in the death of several Negroes. When the citizens of New Haven, Connecticut, arrayed themselves in 1831 against a plan to establish in that city a Negro manual labor college, there was held in Philadelphia a meeting which passed resolutions euphemistically endorsing this effort to rid the community of the evils of the immigration of free Negroes. There arose also a custom of driving Negroes away from Independence Square on the 4th of July, because they were neither considered nor desired as part of the political body. It was thought that in the state of feeling of the 30s that the Negroes will be annihilated. Let me read this once more from Carter G. Woodson. It was thought that in the state of the feeling of the 30s that the Negro will be annihilated. D. Jacobville also observed that the Negroes were more detested in free states than those were held as slaves. There have been much such a reaction since 1800 that no position of consequence was open to Negroes. However well educated they might be, and the education of blacks, which was once vigorously protected there, became unpopular. This was especially true in Harrisburg and Pennsylvania, but by no means confined to large cities. Pennsylvania press said nothing in behalf of the race. It was generally thought that the freedom had not been an advantage of the Negro, and that instead of making progress, they filled jails and almshouses and multiplied pest holes to afflict the city with disease and crime. The Negroes of York carefully worked out in 1803 a plan to burn the city. Incendiaries set on fire a number of houses, 11 which was destroyed, whereas there were others attempts in the general destruction of the city. The authorities arrested a number of Negroes, but ran the risk of having the jail broken open by their sympathizing fellow men. After a reign of terror for a half a week, order was restored, and 20 of the accused was convicted of arson. Now you can read that sidebar right quick. You can read that story as one of the 250 slave revolts by Herbert Aperture. He goes more deeper into that story about York, Pennsylvania, which was a slave revolt, because as I said earlier in the chapter I just read of Carter G. Woodson, slavery was still there in Pennsylvania. And a woman led that slave revolt, a black woman. She led that slave revolt. So if you want more reading, more in-depth reading on that, that's the book for it. In 1820, there occurred so many flagrations that a vigilante committee was organized. Whether or not the Negroes are guilty of a crime is not known, but the numbers of them left on account of fear of being punished or because of the indignities they were subject to. Numerous positions, therefore, came before the legislature to stop the immigration of Negroes. It was proposed in 1840 to tax all free Negroes to assist them in getting out of the state for colonization. The citizens of Lee County asked the authorities in 1830 to expel all Negroes and persons of color found in the state. Another position prayed that they be deprived of freedom of movement. Bills embodying these ideas were frequent and considered, but they were never passed. Stronger opposition to this, however, was manifested in the form of actual outbreaks on a large scale in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. The immediate cause of the first real clash was the abolition agitation in the city in 1834, following exciting news of another such disturbance a few months prior to this date in several northern cities. A group of boys started a riot, destroying a Negro resort. A mob then proceeded to the Negro district, where whites and colored men engaged in fighting with clubs and stones. The next day, the mob ruined the African Presbyterian Church and attacked some Negroes, destroying their property, beating them mercilessly. This riot continued for 3 days. A committee appointed to inquire into the causes of the riot reported that the aim of the rioters had been to make the Negroes go away because they believed that their labor was to deprive them of work, and because that the blacks had shielded criminals and had made such noise and disorder in their churches as to make them a nuisance. So they're saying that the black community was taking away all the jobs, all the money, and we shielded our criminals to protect them in our church because how we did our Christianity, catching the Holy Ghost and the Holy Spirit and things of that nature, and jumping up and down. They consider that to be a nuisance on Sunday. It seemed that the most intelligent and well-to-do people of Philadelphia keenly felt that the city had thus been disgraced, but the mob spirit continued. The next year was marked by the same disorder, because a half-witted Negro attempted to murder a white man. A large mob stirred up in the city again. There was a repetition of the beating of Negroes and the destruction of property, while the police, as the year before, were so inactive as to give rise to the charge that they was accessories to the riot. In 1838, There occurred another outbreak which developed into an anti-abolition riot, as the public mind has been so much exercised in the decision of abolitionists and by their close social contact with Negroes. The clash came on the 17th of May, where Pennsylvania Hall, the center of abolition agitation, was burned. Fighting between black and white ensued on the following night when the Color Orphanage Asylum was attacked and a Negro church burned. Order was finally restored for the good of all concerned, but the majority of the people sympathized with the rioters was evidenced by the fact that the community charged with investigating the disturbance reported the mosque composed of strangers who could not be recognized. It was well to note that this riot occurred the year that Negroes in Pennsylvania were disenfranchised. So the same year this riot happened, they took away the vote from the black people. The following example of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh had riots in 1839, resulting in the maltreatment of a number of Negroes and demolishing some of their homes. When the Negro of Pennsylvania paraded the city in 1842, celebrating the abolition of slavery in the West Indies, they ensured a battle led by whites who undertook the breakup of the provision, along with beating and killing of the usual number, went also the destruction of the new African Hall, which is the Masonic Hall. You know what I'm saying? It's called Prince Hall Main Street today. But we had our old Masonic temple. They burned that down in the Negro Presbyterian Church. The grand jury charged with the inquiry of the causes report that the prosecution was to blame. So us celebrating was to blame in that one. For several years thereafter, the city remained quiet until 1849. Now, I'm going to take a sidebar quick. I'm going to go back to this. Now, back in the day, we don't do this no more, which is a shame for us. Shame on us here. But as I said, when the Negroes of Philadelphia paraded the city in 1842, celebrating the abolition of slavery in the West Indies, because we used to celebrate that. There ensued a battle led by whites who undertook the breakup of the procession, along with beating and killing of the usual number, when also the destruction of the new African Hall, which is like the Masonic Hall. They didn't give a damn if it was Masons or not. They didn't really care about that. And the Negro Presbyterian Church. They also didn't give a damn they was Christians. You know what I'm saying? They was just niggas to them. The grand jury charged an inquiry into the cause reported that the procession was to blame. For several years thereafter, the city remained quiet until 1849, when there occurred a riot on bound blacks by the killers of Munsing, using firearms, which many were wounded. This disturbance was finally quelled by the aid of the militia. Let's read this one more time. For several years thereafter, the city remained quiet until 1849, when there occurred a raid on the blacks by the killers of Mama Singh, using firearms with which many were wounded. This disturbance was finally quelled by the aid of the militia. These classes sometimes reach further north than free states bordering slave commonwealths. Mobs broke up abolitionist meetings in the city of New York in 1834, when there was sent to Congress a number of petitions for the abolition of slavery. This mob even assailed eminent citizens as Arthur and Louis Tappan, mainly on account of their friendly attitude towards Negroes. On October 21st, 1834, the same feeling developed in Ithaca, where it was to be held an anti-slavery meeting according to the previous notice. The 600 delegates who assembled was warned to disband. A mob then organized itself and drove the delegates from the town. That same month, the people of Palmyra, New York, held a meeting which adopted a resolution to the fact that the owners of the house or tenements in that town occupied by blacks of the character complained to be requested to use all their rightful means to clear their premises of such occupants by the earliest possible period, and that it be recommended that such proprietor refused to rent to the same thereafter any person of color whatever. In New York, Negroes were excluded from places of amusement and public conveyance and subjugated in places of worship. In the draft riots which occurred there in 1863, one of the aims of the mob was to assassinate Negroes and destroy their property. They burned the colored orphanage asylum of that city and hanged Negroes from lampposts. Now you can watch the movie Gangs in New York for that. They go into that. The situation in parts of New England was not much better. For fear of the evil of an increasing population of free persons of color, the people of Canada, New Hampshire, broke up the Knowles Academy because it decided to admit Negro students, thinking that many of the race might thereby be encouraged to come to that state. When Prentice Carnot established the Canterbury, Connecticut, an academy to which he decided to admit Negroes, the mayor, selectmen, and citizens of the city protested. And when their protests failed to deter this heroine, they induced the legislature to enact a special law covering the case and invoke measures to have Prudence Cornell in prison because she would not desist. This very law and arguments upholding it justified the drastic measures on the ground that an increase in the colored population would be an injury to people of that state. In the new commonwealths formed out of the Western Territory, there was the same fear as to Negro domination. And consequently, there followed a wave of legislation intended in some cases not only to withhold the Negro settlers to exercise their right of citizenship, but to discourage or even prevent them from coming into the territory. The question as to what should be done with the Negroes was an early on an issue in Ohio. It came up in Constitutional Convention in 1803 and provoked some discussion, but the body considered it insufficient to settle the matter for the time being by merely leaving the Negroes, Indians, and foreigners out of the pale of the newly recognized body politic by conveniently incorporating the word white throughout the Constitution. It soon was evident, however, that the matter had not been settled, and the legislation of 1804 had to give serious consideration to the immigration of Negroes into that state. It was therefore enacted that no Negro or mulatto should remain there permanently unless he could furnish a certificate of freedom issued by some court, that all Negroes in that commonwealth should be registered before the following June, and that no man should employ a Negro who had failed to comply with these conditions. Should one be detected in hiring, harboring, or hindering the capture of a fugitive black, he was liable to the fine of $50, and his master could recover pay for the service of his slave to the amount of 50 cents a day. As this legislature did not meet the demands of those who desire further to discourage Negro immigration, the legislature of 1807 was induced to enact a law to effect that no Negro should be permitted to settle in Ohio unless within 20 days give a bond to the amount of $500 for his good behavior and the assurance that he would not become a public charge. This measure provided also raising the fine for the concealment of a fugitive from $50 to $100, one half of which should go to the person upon the testimony whom the conviction should be secure. Negro evidence in the case to which a white was party was considered illegal. So a black man cannot testify against a white man in this one. In 1830, Negroes was included from the service of state militia, so they can't join in the state army. In 1831, they were deprived of the privilege of serving on juries, and in 1838, they were denied the right of having their children educated at the expense of the state. In Indiana, the situation was worse than in Ohio. We have already noted above how the settlers in the southern part endeavored to make that a slave state. When that had all but after been successful, seemed impossible that the state enacted laws to prevent or discourage the influx of freed Negroes and restricted the privileges of those already there. In 1824, a stringent law for the return of fugitives were passed. The expulsion of free Negroes was a matter of concern, and in 1831, it provided that unless they give bond for their behavior and support that they could be removed. Otherwise, the county overseers could hire out such Negroes to the highest bidder. Negroes were not allowed to attend school maintained at public expense, might not give creating evidence against a white man, and could not intermarry with a white persons. They might, however, serve as witnesses against Negroes, so they could testify against other Negroes. In the same way, free Negroes meant discouragement in Illinois. They suffered from all disabilities imposed on their class in Ohio and Indiana, and were denied the right to sue for their liberty in courts. When there arose many abolitionists who encouraged the coming of the fugitives from the labor in the South, one element of citizens of Illinois, unwilling to accept this unusual flux of members of an other race, passed drastic laws in 1853 prohibiting immigration. They provided for the prosecution of any person bringing a Negro into the state, and also for arresting and fining any Negro $50 should he appear there and remain longer than 10 days. If he proved unable to pay the fine, he could be sold to any person who could pay the cost of the trial. In Michigan, the situation was a little better, but with waves of hostile legislation then sweeping over the new Commonwealth, Michigan was not allowed to constitute altogether an exception. Some of this intense feeling found expression in the form of law hostile to the Negro, this being the Act of 1827, which provided for the registration of all free persons of colors and for the exclusion of them from the territory, all of blacks that could not provide a certificate and the fact that they were free. Free persons of color were required to file bonds with one or more freeholder securities in a penal sum of $500 for their good behavior, and the bondsmen were expected to provide for their maintenance if they failed to support themselves. Failure to comply with the law meant expulsion from the territory. The opposition to the Negroes migrating to the New West was not restricted to enacting of laws, which in some cases were never enforced. Several communities took the law into their own hands. During these years, when a Negro was seeking freedom in Northwest Territory, and when free blacks were being established there by philanthropics, it seemed that the Southern uplanders fleeing from slavery to the border states and foreigners seeking their fortunes in the New World that they had made might possibly to be crowded out of this new territory by Negroes. Frequent clashes therefore followed afterwards, and they had pressed through a period of toleration and dependence on the execution of hostile laws. The clashes of the greatest consequences occurred in the Northwest Territory, where a large number of uplanders from the South had gone. Some had escaped the ill effects of slavery, and others to hold slaves if possible, and when that seemed possible to exclude blacks together. This persecution of Negroes received also the hearty cooperation of the foreign element, who, being an underdeveloped class, had to do menial labor in competition with blacks. The feeling of the foreigner was especially mischievous for the reasons that they were, like the Negroes, at first settled in large numbers in urban communities. Generally speaking, the feeling was like that exhibited by the Germans in Mercer County, Ohio. Citizens of this frontier community, in registering their protests against the selling of Negroes there, adopted the following resolutions. Resolve that we would not live among the Negroes as we settled here first, and we have fully determined that we will resist the settlement of blacks and mulattoes in this county to the fullest extent of our means, the being not expected. Resolve that blacks in this county be, and they are hereby respectfully requested to leave in the country with all on before the date of March 1847. In the case of the neglect or refusal to comply with the request, we pledge ourselves to remove them peacefully if we can, forcibly if we must. Resolve that we who are here assemble and pledge ourselves not to employ or trade with any black or mulatto person in any manner whatsoever, or permit them to have any grinding done in our mills after the first day of January next. In 1827, there arose a storm of protest on the occasion of settling 70 freemen in Lawrence County, Ohio. A philanthropic master of Pennsylvania County, Virginia, on Black Friday, January 1st, 1830, 80 Negroes were driven out of Portsmouth, Ohio, at the request of 100 or 200 white citizens set for an urgent memorial. So many Negroes during these years concentrated at Cincinnati that the laboring element forced the execution of almost a dead law requiring free Negroes to produce certificates and give them bonds for their behavior and support. A mob attacked the homes of the blacks, killing a number of them and forcing 1,200 others to leave for Canada West, where they established a settlement known as Wilberforce. So in Cincinnati, they had a right when they found out the law wasn't being enforced, with blacks having a certificate and prove their bondsmen, they went and basically destroyed the black community. Just ran right through a roughshod and, forced 1,200 of them to leave. In 1836, another mob attacked and destroyed the press of James G. Barnaby, the editor of The Philanthropist, because of the encouragement of his abolitionist organ, gave immigrating Negroes. But in 1841 came a decidedly systematic effort on the part of the foreigners. Now remember, this is the foreigners, this is the Germans, right? All this stuff is the Germans and the Irish and stuff like that. This ain't the Anglo-Saxon white. In 1841, decidedly systematic on the side of the foreigner and pro-slavery sympathizers to kill off and drive out Negroes who were becoming too well established in the city and who were giving offenses to the white man who desired to deal with them as Negroes was treated in the South. The city continued to exercise state for about a week. There were brought into play in the upheaval the police of the city and the state militia before the shooting of the Negroes and the burning of their homes could be checked. So far as it was known, no white men were punished, although few of them arrested. Some Negroes were committed to prison during the foray. They were thereafter either discharged upon producing certificates of nativity or giving a bond or indefinitely held, which is slavery. In southern Indiana and Illinois, the same condition attained. Observing the situation in Indiana, a contributor of the Niles Registry remarked in 1818, upon arrival there were 60 or 70 liberated Negroes sent by Society of Friends of North Carolina. They were able to a species of population that was not acceptable to the people of that state, nor indeed to any other, whether free or slave holding. For they cannot rise to become like other men unless in other countries where their own color predominates. They must always remain degraded and inferior classes of person without hope of much bettering their condition. The Indiana farmer, voicing the sentiment of the same community, regretted the increase of this population that seemed to be enlarging the numbers sent to that territory. The editor insisted that the community which enjoys the benefits of the black labor shall also suffer all consequences. Since the people of Indiana derive no advantage from slavery, he begged that they be excused from the inconvenience. Most of the blacks that migrated here therefore possess, he thought, feelings of quite unprepared to make good citizens. A sense of inferiority early impressed on their minds, destitute of everything but bodily power and having no character to lose and no prospect of acquiring one. Even did they not they know its value. They are prepared for the commission of any act when the prospect of evading punishment is favorable. With the exception of such centers as Eden, Upper Alton, Bellevue, and Chicago, this antagonist attitude was also general in the state of Illinois. Negroes were despised, abused, and maltreated as persons who had no rights that a white man should respect. Even in Detroit, Michigan in 1833, a fracas was started by attack on Negroes. Because of a courageous group of them had effected the rescue and escape of one Thornton Blackburn and his wife, who had been arrested by the sheriff as alleged fugitives from Kentucky. The citizens invoked the law of 1827 that required Negroes to produce certificates and furnish bonds for their behavior and support. The anti-slavery sentiment there, however, was so strong that the law was not long originally enforced. And so it was in several other parts of the West, which, however, were exceptional. On a little sidebar right here, there was an unusual effort to have slavery legalized in Michigan. At the time of the fire, 1805, there were 6 colored men and 9 colored women in the town of Detroit. In 1807, there were so many of them that the Governor Hall organized a company of colored militia. Joseph Campan owned 10 at one time. The importance of slaves discontinued after September 17, 1792, by the Act of the Canadian Parliament, which also provided that all born thereafter should be free at the age of 25. The Ordinance of 1787 by the Sixth Amendment prohibited. So, like I said, it was slavery there, but then it wasn't there. Okay, so that's the end of that. So as you see, even though we living in these northern spots, the free Negro, they're still going through their ups and their downs. The people didn't want them there. You know what I'm saying? They didn't want the black people there. So they try to burn their people property out, try to take their property down. You know, as I said before, we used to have festivals celebrating free slavery, slavery in the West Indies. And every time we do this yearly event, a riot will pop off. You know what I'm saying? In certain places of Pennsylvania and stuff like that, Philadelphia, as you're reading, and other places like that, us having church and how we do Christianity and put our twist on Christianity would scare them, and that will pop up a riot for them. You know, to put pepper gas into the church and other things of that nature. You know what I'm saying? So this study the struggle that we had to go through in the Northwest Territories, which is now called the Midwest of the United States of America, during the early process of it. You know, the stuff we had to go through and had to fight through. This Carter G. Woodson, The Century of Negro Migration. Not a real rare book about Carter G. Woodson, but we're reading right here. Much love to the ancestors. Hit the like button. We're going to have more Black history like this. Peace.